I'm a 57-year-old man, and for 26 years I was married to the woman I thought was the love of my life. Let's call her Jennifer. We met back in college and had known each other for 10 years before getting married. During that time, we spent 2 years just as friends, 1 year when I was trying to win her over, and the following 7 years dating, even though there were stretches of long distance because of our jobs. Somehow, despite the time and the miles between us, our relationship held strong. Jennifer wasn't simply my wife or the mother of my children, she was also my closest friend since college, someone who got me like no one ever did. That's exactly why her betrayal hit me so hard. About a week ago, Jennifer and I went to our college reunion. Every year, our school puts on a reunion for the class that graduated 35 years ago. It's a pretty big deal, with live music from singers and celebrity performances, and alumni look forward to it with great anticipation. This year, it was our class's turn to shine, and all of us were excited to reconnect and see how much time had changed us. Jennifer and I were especially proud, because we were one of the few college couples who had managed to stay together this long. We walked into the event with high hopes of showing everyone our strong bond, not knowing I was actually stepping right into a trap of my own making. We were having an amazing time catching up with some of our oldest friends, it felt like we were reliving the best moments of our lives. But then, a guy approached us, let's call him Brad. Brad had always had a bit of a crush on Jennifer, and everyone knew about his deep infatuation with her. Jennifer was one of the brightest and most attractive students in our class, and sure enough, she'd had her share of admirers back in the day. I was one of them once, too. Still, Brad was never the type to just flirt and move on if a girl wasn't interested, he was persistently chasing her throughout college and even after, even though he knew she was in a relationship with me. I was confident in myself and never really bothered with his advances, even though everyone was well aware that Jennifer was far out of his league. But Brad just wouldn't quit. I remember when Brad first found out that Jennifer married me, he even texted me, claiming that she'd made a huge mistake and that he had always hoped I'd take better care of her. Jennifer and I just laughed off his overly dramatic, almost childish, romantic notions. We hadn't heard from him again until the reunion. We figured that after 35 years of graduation and 26 years of marriage, Brad would have moved on. To our shock, though, he was still hung up on Jennifer. He greeted everyone with big hugs, and while I returned them, Jennifer only offered a handshake because his intense stare made her uneasy. He sat down right across from her and gave her a look that was hard to miss. I couldn't help but ask if he'd brought his family along. He then said he was single, mentioning he'd been married briefly in his 40s but ended up getting divorced. I offered him my sympathy, sorry to hear that, and he immediately exploded, "Oh, you should be sorry, you stole my love," followed by a fit of manic laughter. If I were still in my 30s, I might have thrown a punch, but at 57, I wasn't about that life. Besides, Brad wasn't physically intimidating, he was just a sleazy loudmouth whose crude jokes left everyone squirming in discomfort. So, we mostly just brushed off his antics. Things took a turn when Jennifer suddenly became very quiet. Our close college friend, Stephanie, pulled her aside, and both of us tried to lift her spirits, urging her to forget about Brad and simply enjoy the evening. Knowing how much Jennifer tends to overthink, we did our best to ease her worries. Out of nowhere, Brad came back over again, I suspect he'd been eyeing us all night. To our surprise, he started apologizing, saying he never meant to upset her and that he actually just wanted to make her happy by reminding her that, despite the years and any changes in her looks, she still had someone who admired her. I couldn't stand his cheesy lines any longer, so I told him to back off. Jennifer asked him to leave us alone, but he kept insisting that she forgive him so we could enjoy what might be the last reunion of our lives. Those words made me decide it was time to put everything behind me and move on. That night was, without a doubt, our final chance to meet with all our old friends and classmates. Jennifer hugged Brad and told him to let her go, urging him to move on. After that, all of us, me, Jennifer, Stephanie, and the rest, joined together on the dance floor, and the party slowly turned into a fun time. Later, I noticed Stephanie and Jennifer chatting with Brad, who was standing beside them and dancing in this almost silly way. It sort of relieved me to see that things seemed to have settled back into normal, so I felt it was safe for me to relax and mingle with other old friends. But then, about an hour later, I realized that Jennifer and Stephanie weren't anywhere to be seen. At first, I didn't worry much. I figured everyone was just chatting in small groups. I even got a chance to catch up with some friends on my own. But as time passed and they still hadn't reappeared, I began looking for them and tried calling their phones. They wouldn't pick up, and I assumed the loud music was drowning out the rings. After about half an hour, Jennifer came back, but something was definitely off. She didn't look different on the surface, yet I could tell she wasn't herself. She was unusually quiet and kept insisting that I leave with her. Stephanie eventually joined us, but throughout the rest of the night, Jennifer and Stephanie barely spoke a word to each other, as if they'd had an argument and were avoiding eye contact. I kept asking Jennifer why she seemed so upset and wanted to call it a night early, but she stayed silent. The drive home lasted over an hour. I kept checking on her, asking if she was all right, but all she said was that she was just tired and needed some rest. It unnerved me because Jennifer was always full of energy. Seeing her so subdued without any clear reason made my stomach twist with worry. I even asked if it had something to do with Stephanie, but all she would say was, no. With nothing more to do, I let her sleep and we arrived home. Meanwhile, our friends were flooding social media with upbeat photos and happy messages about the reunion, but inside our house, things were far from joyful. Jennifer went to bed with her eyes closed. I suspect she pretended to be asleep. I mention that because it was nearly 2 a.m. when I finally crashed. I don't know how long I slept, but eventually Jennifer woke me up in tears, resting her head on my chest. I held her tight and asked if she was upset about seeing our old classmates, but she just continued to cry. All I could do was hold her, hoping that by letting the tears out, she'd eventually feel a little relief. After she finally calmed down, Jennifer told me something that left me completely stunned. She admitted she'd cheated on me with Brad. I was frozen, too shocked to even ask questions. My mind raced, trying to piece together what might have happened the last time I'd seen Jennifer laughing and dancing with Brad and Stephanie on the dance floor, before the three of them vanished for about an hour. When Jennifer returned, she looked utterly miserable and insisted we leave immediately. She claimed that Stephanie knew about everything and was furious with her, which explained Stephanie's strangely quiet demeanor. I couldn't bring myself to speak, and as I sat there dumbfounded, Jennifer began to explain on her own. She recounted how, while we were dancing, Brad kept coming over to apologize for all the embarrassment he had caused, especially since she had rejected his advances so many times. He flooded her with compliments, telling her that in all his travels around the world, he'd never met a woman as extraordinary as her. Slowly, she started to believe his flattering words. At one point, he asked if she'd join him for a walk. At first she refused, but he insisted it would be their last chance for a real conversation and that she deserved to hear his true feelings. Wanting some peace and quiet, she eventually agreed to take a stroll with him on the college lawn. Out there, Brad laid it on thick, declaring his lifelong love for her and calling her the most amazing woman on earth. He said all sorts of things, but the bottom line was that Jennifer ended up giving in. She admits now that she was both drunk and foolish, and that his words made her feel a weight lift off her shoulders. I won't go into every uncomfortable detail, but she even told me that halfway through what happened, her guilt kicked in, and she tried to push him away. I sat there numb and couldn't muster any reaction when she reached out for some sign from me, but I stayed silent. I asked for a moment to gather my thoughts while she kept crying and apologizing. Eventually, I told her to get some sleep so we could talk about it in the morning. Clinging to me, she admitted she was scared of losing me. I just closed my eyes, lying there replaying everything in my mind. And then I remembered something odd. After Jennifer came back from that walk, Brad had given me this creepy, triumphant grin, as if he'd finally won her over. I didn't think too much of it at the time, but now I can't shake the anger and disgust bubbling up inside me. I wasn't in a state for self-pity, and the thought of sharing a bed with Jennifer became impossible. Sensing she'd fallen into a deep sleep after hours of crying, I quietly got up, packed my laptop, wallet, and a few essentials into my backpack, and left our home. I loved Jennifer. We had built a life together for 26 years, complete with a family and children, but I couldn't see a way forward if I stayed until morning. She might have talked me out of leaving. So, I checked into a hotel and blocked her phone number and all her social media. By the time I managed to sleep, around 8 or 9 a.m., my phone had already been ringing non-stop with calls about our kids. Jennifer and I have 2 children, a 24-year-old son, Jake, and a 21-year-old daughter, Amanda. They were both in college on the same campus. After reading about similar situations online, I realized I made a rash decision that night by ghosting Jennifer. I probably should have thought out my next steps more carefully, to stay in control of what came next. I read stories of men who pretended everything was fine with their unfaithful partners while secretly planning revenge, even going so far as to expose the affair. But for me, acting normal with Jennifer wasn't an option. She was not just my wife, she was my best friend. Even if I had pretended, she would have seen right through me. The idea of her cheating on me was something I never expected, so I never had a plan ready for a situation like this. When my kids finally called, I had no idea what to say, but I knew I had to speak to one of them before things escalated or they worried someone might report me missing. I decided to call Jake, who's usually the more level-headed one, and told him bluntly that there was no nice way of saying it. His mom had cheated on me the night before with that persistent admirer of hers, Brad. Jake was shocked to learn that his own mother could do such a thing, especially since we had always been known as one tight, loving family. He kept insisting there must be some mistake, and he peppered me with questions asking for every detail in order. But I knew that if I went over everything, it would just break him even more before he had a chance to rebuild his life. I even half-joked that I wished it were all just a terrible joke, but Jennifer had admitted it all. Even though Jake, at 24, had already tasted heartbreak, I understood that this revelation was tearing him apart in a way I hadn't anticipated. I made him promise not to share any of this with anyone until I'd spoken further with him. Meanwhile, I texted Amanda, lying that I was swamped with work and needed to be out of town for a while, which ended any further calls for that night. So here's how things stood. While Amanda believed I was away on business, both Jake and Jennifer already knew we were separated. In the following days, I spent countless hours online searching for top-notch lawyers and considering my options. That's when I discovered one of those online communities where many men had gone through something similar. I read about how they'd plotted their revenge and taken action against unfaithful partners, even going as far as attacking the other guy involved. I understood their anger, I truly did, but I couldn't bring myself to exact revenge on Jennifer. I still loved her dearly, and to say I could ruin her life would be a lie. I know I can't get back together with her, reconciliation isn't an option anymore. Frankly, I have no idea how I'll get past this or if I'll ever recover completely. I'm left with so many responsibilities, my work, my children, our shared assets, and I've got an appointment with a lawyer tomorrow to see what steps I should take next. I promise to keep everyone updated as things progress. Hey, everyone, thank you for all your support in the comments. While reading them, I realized I forgot to mention some important background details. Both Jennifer and I worked as management consultants. In our late 40s, we both left those full-time jobs. Jennifer finally pursued her dream of writing, and I started working as a business consultant for startups as a self-employed guy. I don't really have a fixed office, my work takes me to various clients' offices or sometimes I work from home. And so far, Jennifer hasn't been able to track me down. As I mentioned, I'm almost 60 now, and we'd been planning our retirement for years, saving up for a beach house out in the country that we hope to buy next year. We had already scoped out a few properties and even started talking to some sellers. Luckily, we hadn't actually closed the deal yet, because that would have complicated things even more. Ever since I ghosted her, Jennifer's been trying non-stop to get in touch with me. The day after I posted my initial account online, I met with my lawyer. He advised that I should let the kids know about our separation since they're adults now. We also discussed splitting our assets evenly between Jennifer and me. I wasn't going to mess with her financial rights. After all, she'd earned her half fair and square. Part of the complication was that Jennifer might have hoped we'd reconcile if she could just get close enough to convince me otherwise. But even as the divorce papers were being drawn up, I made it clear to everyone that I wasn't interested in patching things up. I met with my children. I asked Jake to discreetly bring Amanda along to a restaurant without giving away that I'd be there. Jake agreed, but when Amanda saw me, she immediately bombarded me with questions, one of which was whether I'd been cheating on her mom, since she knew I'd cut off all contact with her. I could see how much it hurt her, but I had to be strong for both of them. I calmed Amanda down and assured her I wasn't involved with anyone new. Then, I gradually told them the truth. that Jennifer had cheated on me the night before with that obsessive Brad. Jake, even though he'd suspected something was off, was devastated. He kept asking for every single detail, but I knew that if I went into the minutiae, it might shatter him completely before he even had a chance to rebuild his life. I wished I could tell him it was all just a terrible joke, but Jennifer had confessed everything. I remember that Brad, right after Jennifer came back from that infamous walk, gave me a weird, unsettling grin. I didn't think much of it back then, maybe it was just his smug way of showing that he'd won. But realizing that now only made my anger and disgust surge even stronger. I wasn't going to fall for his petty stalking tactics. I didn't marry Brad or trust him, everything I believed in, every ounce of love and loyalty, I had saved for Jennifer. And yet, here I was, feeling utterly betrayed. That night, instead of facing Jennifer until morning, when she might have talked me out of leaving, I decided to leave. I packed my backpack and checked into a hotel. By sunrise, around 8 o'clock or 9 a.m., my phone was blowing up with calls about our kids. As I mentioned earlier, Jennifer and I have 2 children, Jake, 24, and Amanda, 21. They're both in college on the same campus. After reading so many similar stories online, I realized how rash my decision had been. I should have planned my next move more carefully so I wouldn't lose control of the situation. I've read accounts of guys who pretended everything was normal with their cheating partners while secretly plotting revenge and eventually revealing their infidelity. But honestly, I couldn't bear the thought of doing that to Jennifer. She was not only my wife but also the person I trusted most in the world. Even if I tried to act like nothing happened, she would have seen right through me. I never imagined her betraying me, let alone with Brad. And because I hadn't thought ahead, I was completely unprepared for the fallout, especially when Jake called, and I had no good story for him. Over the next few days, I spent hours online looking up the best lawyers and trying to figure out a plan. That's when I stumbled upon one of those online communities full of men who'd gone through similar betrayals. I read how they'd plotted their revenge and even been vengeful toward the other guy. I completely understand their anger, I do, but I couldn't even think about taking revenge on Jennifer. I still cared for her too much to deliberately ruin her life. It hurt like hell, but I knew that getting back together wasn't an option. I had too many responsibilities now, my job, my kids, my finances. I set up a meeting with a lawyer for the very next day to get his advice, and I promised I'd update everyone as soon as I figured things out. A while later, after a series of tough conversations with my kids, I ended up speaking with Jake on the phone. He was clearly shaken by everything and kept asking for more details, even though I tried to keep it as simple as possible. I made him promise not to share any of what I'd told him until I had a chance to explain things further. I also texted Amanda under the guise of being swamped with work and traveling for business, which conveniently ended any more calls that night. In the days that followed, it became painfully clear that nothing could ever go back to the way it was. I began searching for legal advice, and that's when I discovered an online community of men who'd experienced the same kind of betrayal. I read their stories about plotting revenge, but while I felt their anger, I knew I could never sink to that level. I still loved Jennifer, even though I'd never have imagined she could do something like this, and I couldn't imagine intentionally hurting her life further. I realized I had no idea how to move forward. I was facing a divorce after 26 years of marriage, a separation that rocked my world, and I had countless responsibilities to handle, from work to the care of my kids and our assets. I had a meeting with a lawyer lined up for the next day, and I resolved to let you all know what happened next as soon as I had any news. Later, I managed to piece together everything that had happened, including the small details I'd missed in the shock. I couldn't believe that Jennifer, the woman I adored, had made such a drastic mistake. I was left alone to fend off my own turmoil, and all I could do was prepare myself for a future without the woman I once cherished. In the following days, I spent a lot of time online researching legal options and planning the next steps. It was a cold reminder of how fast life can change when trust is broken. I learned about others' experiences, about men who pretended everything was fine while secretly plotting their next move. I felt a mix of anger, sorrow, and numbness that I could hardly express in words. As the legal process moved forward, I met with my children to explain what had happened. Jake, ever the voice of reason, and Amanda, visibly heartbroken, both pleaded with me to consider giving our marriage one more chance. But I made it clear, I was filing for divorce. Their tears and the pain in their voices cut deeper than anything else, yet I knew I couldn't compromise my self-respect any longer. With time, I also began to learn more about our past lives. Jennifer and I both used to work as management consultants, but in our late 40s we left those jobs. Jennifer followed her passion for writing, and I became a freelance consultant for startups, working with many different clients. That's why I never had a fixed office. My work and my life took me wherever I needed to go. And so far, Jennifer hasn't been able to track me down. At nearly 60, I'd been planning my retirement for quite some time, saving every penny for a beach house in the countryside we hoped to buy next year. We had even started chatting with property owners and scouting out potential places. Luckily, we hadn't finalized anything yet, otherwise, it would have complicated matters even more. Ever since I ghosted Jennifer, she's been desperate to get in touch with me. But now, I'm determined to move forward with my life. After meeting my lawyer the day after my post, he advised that I inform the kids about our separation since they're all adults now. We also talked about splitting everything evenly. There's no way I was going to take away what Jennifer legally deserves. I know she's entitled to half of our assets, and she worked hard for everything we built together. Even though a part of me still cared for her, I realized that reconciliation just wasn't an option any longer. Soon after, I met with Jake and Amanda together. I asked Jake to discreetly bring Amanda to a restaurant without letting on that I'd be there. When Amanda saw me, she immediately started questioning me, even asking if I'd been unfaithful myself since she knew I'd cut ties with Jennifer. Her anger and hurt were almost too much to bear, but I had to remain strong for both of them. I assured them I wasn't involved with anyone new, and then I slowly broke the news. Jennifer had cheated on me the night before, with that obsessive Brad. Even though Jake had somehow suspected something was off, he was devastated beyond words, and he kept demanding every detail. I knew sharing the full story would shatter him, so I kept it brief, even though deep down I wished it were all just some terrible mistake. In the midst of that difficult conversation, I learned that Amanda had been living with Jennifer for the past 15 days since I left the house. Amanda's reaction was intense. She hugged me and even apologized for being angry with me, though I couldn't help but feel that she was also hurting over everything that had happened. Both Jake and Amanda asked if there was any chance I might give our marriage another try. I had to be clear, I was set on divorce. Their emotional breakdown was heart-wrenching, but they promised to stick by me through this nightmare, reminding me that, despite the separation, my children were not going anywhere. I reassured them that while Jennifer and I were parting ways, would never be separating from them. Amanda told me that Jennifer had been so distraught lately, she wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping, and was constantly on edge, always calling and even showing up at my client meetings to ask where I was. The offices confirmed I hadn't been there for 2 straight weeks. When Amanda asked if something had happened between Jennifer and me, since this was the first time I'd acted so differently, Jennifer didn't say a word. Instead, she just continued to cry and lock herself away in her room. I told Amanda to stay home with her mom until everything was final, even though I could see the growing anger in both kids when it came to their mom's behavior. A few days later, I even got a text from Brad asking about Jennifer. He wanted to know if I was really going to divorce her now that he'd learned about the affair, and he even suggested that maybe he should take her instead. I replied that Jennifer was free to make her own decisions, and then I blocked him. No way was I going to let him get under my skin any further. I'm sure he tried to provoke me, but by that point, I felt nothing but indifference toward him. I didn't sign up for any of his twisted games. I trusted and loved Jennifer, and it was she who had betrayed me. Time passed, and the divorce papers were mailed out that very day. I still waited for Amanda's call about Jennifer's reaction. I promised I'd update you all once the divorce was finalized, but in the meantime, I had so many other things to manage: my work, my assets, my retirement plans, and above all, my children's well-being. Eventually, the divorce was settled. When Jennifer received the papers, she just couldn't take it. Up until that point, she'd been living in her own little bubble, thinking I was just angry and would come back once my temper cooled down. That bubble burst the moment she saw the papers. She demanded a meeting with me via my lawyer, but my lawyer refused, saying that she was set to receive half of everything, which was more than she deserved, according to him. Jennifer protested, saying she didn't care about the money, she only wanted me back. I know her well enough to understand that if I had seen her in person that day, I might have changed my mind. I still loved her deeply, and the thought of watching her fall apart pained me, yet I couldn't compromise my own dignity. She'd taken our family apart, and I just couldn't endure living like that any longer. Not long after, Amanda urgently called me. She said that Jennifer's mental state had worsened so much that she had to be hospitalized. Jennifer had sunk deep into depression and refused to take any medication or supplements to help her recover. The doctors put her on a liquid diet because she had stopped eating altogether. I know many of you might think I'm heartless or uncaring because of my reaction to her failing health, but have you ever experienced betrayal? If not, you can't even begin to understand the pain I'm going through. To say I loved Jennifer is an understatement. I practically idolized her. I was her biggest supporter, and we'd built a life together over nearly 3 decades. She's the mother of my children. Brad might have been partly right when he said that finding a woman like Jennifer is nearly impossible. She's smart, talented, compassionate, everything anyone could ever want in a partner. And that's why her betrayal cut me so deep. A few days after I got the divorce papers, our mutual friend Stephanie reached out. She was concerned about how I was holding up and asked about Jennifer. I told her we were in the process of separating. Stephanie didn't seem shocked. In fact, she said she had a feeling something like this was bound to happen. Later on, she called again and asked how I had found out about the affair. I explained that Jennifer had confessed everything to me. She admitted it all, even though she tried to cover up some details. Stephanie then told me a version of the story that was slightly different from what Jennifer had described. According to Stephanie, while Jennifer and I were out dancing, Brad made a move, whispering in her ear under the guise of apologizing, and though Stephanie initially tried to intervene, she noticed that Jennifer almost seemed to enjoy his attention, until Jennifer suddenly excused herself to go for a walk with him. Stephanie later revealed that she'd caught sight of them together in the college swimming pool's changing room, a detail that Jennifer had never mentioned to me. It turns out that it wasn't her guilty conscience that made her stop. It was Stephanie's intervention that ended things between them. Even so, I had once held a shred of pride that Jennifer was honest enough to confess her mistake, but after learning that her story wasn't entirely true, I lost all respect for her. In the end, my children told me that Jennifer's mental state had deteriorated so much that she was close to self-harm. I called Stephanie and explained our conversation, making it clear that I now knew the full truth about that night, and I wasn't planning on forgiving her or taking her back. I told Stephanie it was best for Jennifer to focus on her health rather than trying to fix something that was already broken. After all, I knew her too well. Stephanie visited Jennifer and later updated me. Although Jennifer still hadn't completely recovered from her depression, Amanda said that she was doing a bit better. In a surprising turn of events, Jennifer even signed the divorce papers, which brought me some relief. I decided that after wrapping up my remaining work and handling my assets and retirement plans, I'd begin a new chapter, one where I no longer stayed tied down to one place. After spending 26 years as a family man, shifting to this nomadic lifestyle wasn't easy, but I've grown to enjoy it. A few days later, I received a text from Brad asking about Jennifer again. This time, he wanted to know if I was really going through with the divorce. He even said he was willing to take her if that happened. I told him firmly that Jennifer was a free woman and could choose for herself, and then I blocked his number. I'm pretty sure he was trying to get under my skin once more, but I just couldn't feel any anger toward him at that point. I'd already lost so much trust because of Jennifer's betrayal that Brad's antics didn't matter. Around that same time, my kids and I finally began to process what had happened. We learned more about Jennifer's downward spiral, how the cheating, the lies, and her constant need for reassurance had slowly transformed her. Once, she had been a confident, strong woman, but now she seemed insecure, erratic, and desperate for attention. She even started to control the way our kids lived their lives, calling and messaging them relentlessly if they didn't reply immediately. At one point, she insisted that Jake move in with her until he got married, but he politely refused. Amanda tried to talk to her about it, but Jennifer would only break down and beg for forgiveness. It became clear that whatever good that was left of our once happy family was now completely fractured. After a few weeks, Amanda decided she'd had enough. She moved out of the house, saying that she could no longer put her life on hold to take care of Jennifer's endless demands. I understood her decision. She needed to move on. As for Jennifer, things only got worse. My kids eventually confronted her, telling her that her actions had ruined everything we once had. Our once warm, loving home was now filled with anger and disappointment, and even though I still felt a twinge of sorrow, I knew there was no way back. Not long after, I received another update from Stephanie. She mentioned that, despite all Jennifer's claims of remorse, it turned out she hadn't cheated because she was drunk, she did it because she craved the attention and the thrill of being desired. Stephanie explained that Jennifer had begged Brad for a relationship she knew she couldn't truly have, one that went way beyond a casual fling. Brad, on the other hand, admitted he was only interested in a physical connection. He even joked that he'd always been the smarter one for tricking her, a comment that shattered whatever little self-esteem Jennifer had left. That call from Stephanie made it all so painfully clear: Jennifer's betrayal was no accident, it was a choice she made, and now it cost her dearly. As time went by, my daughter later updated me that Jennifer's controlling and intrusive behavior was affecting our entire family. Our once happy gatherings had turned into battlegrounds of hurt feelings and resentment. Amanda eventually decided she had to leave the family home altogether, telling me that she just couldn't cope with Jennifer's constant demands. I realized then that Jennifer needed to find a way to regain control of her own life, otherwise, she would continue to hurt everyone around her. In a twist I never expected, about a week later I received yet another text, from Brad, asking if I still planned to divorce Jennifer. He bragged that he'd been flirting with her right until the day she found out about the separation, and that he'd even claimed he could replace me. I told him bluntly that Jennifer was a free woman capable of making her own decisions, then blocked him again. I wasn't interested in his empty words or his attempts to manipulate the situation any further. A year has now passed since all this upheaval began. I spent several months living in a motel, then moved into a rented condo until the divorce was finalized. As for my work, I eventually shifted entirely to remote clients, which suited my new lifestyle just fine. Regarding the retirement money that Jennifer and I had saved up for our dream beach house, we split it evenly, she got half, and I ended up dividing my share between Jake and Amanda. I never needed it myself. My kids are grown, and I trust them to make something good out of it. Jennifer's life, however, turned even more complicated. Although she once was the picture of strength and resilience, she began spiraling into a state of deep depression. Stephanie told me, and Amanda later confirmed, that Jennifer's behavior had become erratic and controlling, to the point where our children started to resent her. I couldn't really fault them for feeling that way. The once loving woman they knew had become someone completely different. A few days later, I received another update. Despite my repeated claims that I knew Jennifer inside and out, this new information made me question everything. Apparently, while she was in a vulnerable state, she had engaged in a prolonged flirtation with Brad. At first, Brad had seemed sincere, even promising a real relationship with her. But once he learned about our divorce, his attitude shifted dramatically. Suddenly, he ghosted her without a second thought. Jennifer was absolutely shattered, clinging to memories of his declarations of love, even as it became obvious he was only after something casual. He later admitted, almost as if it were a joke, that he couldn't commit to a real relationship. He was happy with his current partner and didn't want any emotional ties with a woman as headstrong as Jennifer. His callous words only deepened her depression, and she ended up feeling more alone than ever. Not long after, I got word that Jennifer's behavior had taken an even darker turn. My daughter finally confessed that living with Jennifer had become unbearable, so much so that she had moved out 2 weeks ago. Amanda said she tried everything to help, but she couldn't sacrifice her own life any longer just to care for her. I understand her decision perfectly. I too need to move on. Jennifer, on the other hand, seemed to be unraveling completely. Even as some people might secretly be glad to see an unfaithful ex suffer, I couldn't find any satisfaction in her misery. I even felt sorry for her, despite everything. Her poor choices have left her drowning in a lifetime of regret, and I truly hope she can find a way to rediscover the confident, independent woman she once was. On my end, however, the past year has been quite the journey. I've been traveling, living in 4 different countries, soaking up new cultures, tasting every type of food I could get my hands on, and fully embracing a nomadic lifestyle. At first, I was disappointed that my retirement plans had to change. I had always pictured a peaceful life spent with Jennifer. But now, I find joy in exploring new places and meeting amazing people from all over the world. To be clear, I haven't jumped into a new relationship or anything like that, well, not until recently. A couple of years ago, during a trip to Tokyo, I met a wonderful woman named Ashley, who's 52. She had just left an abusive relationship and was enjoying her first solo adventure. We crossed paths while hiking up a mountain, and we instantly hit it off, as friends first, since neither of us was looking for anything serious at the time. After Tokyo, I was off to South Korea while she headed to Thailand. We kept in touch over the next 6 months, and eventually decided to travel together. For the past year and a half, Ashley and I have been exploring over 8 different countries. We never rushed into anything physical or emotional in those first couple of months, we just wanted to enjoy each other's company and the experience of traveling, without any pressure to settle down immediately. My children already knew about Ashley, but they chose not to mention it to Jennifer, probably worried it might trigger her depression all over again. One day, after arriving at my hotel, I called Jake to explain why I'd turned down his invitation to spend a few extra days with him. Ashley was with me, and I couldn't just leave her alone. I also told him that I wanted Ashley to attend his upcoming wedding, so she could meet our family. Jake was both excited and a bit anxious about how Jennifer might react. I made it clear that Ashley was important to me, and that she would be at the wedding, no matter what. The wedding was only a week away, so I spent the days beforehand giving Ashley a little tour of the town, since it was her first visit to Kentucky. On the day of the wedding, the moment I arrived, I noticed Jennifer already watching me. When she saw me holding hands with Ashley at the venue, she looked visibly upset. I had warned Ashley that Jennifer might act out, but Ashley reassured me that she could handle it. This was the first time I saw just how controlling and unpredictable Jennifer had become since our separation. Without any warning, she rushed over, grabbed my wrist, and tried to pull me aside. Firmly, I told her I wasn't up for a private chat right then, especially with guests arriving and eyes on us. Jennifer demanded to know if I was calling Ashley my girlfriend or planning on marrying her. I told her it wasn't her business and asked her to back off. But she wouldn't let go, her anger was all over the place. My daughter, Amanda, then stepped in. In a voice that was calm yet brimming with authority, a side of her I'd never fully seen before, she told Jennifer, "Mom, you were supposed to walk into the wedding with Dad, not causing a scene with some random woman. Either accept the way things are and move on, or I'm going to make sure you're kicked out of the wedding." In that moment, I almost wanted to intervene, but Amanda handled the situation herself. I watched as Jennifer's grip on my wrist loosened, and I saw her face shift from anger to heartbreak to deep sadness. Without another word, she walked away. Needless to say, she didn't leave a good first impression on Ashley. Amanda even apologized to Ashley afterward, who just hugged both of us. I tried to reassure her that there was no need to feel sorry. Amanda's strength shone through, and I felt a surge of pride for her. After the wedding, Jennifer's distress only deepened. She either stayed in a corner or looked like she didn't belong, clearly upset that our children were taking a stand and supporting me. I realized then that I needed to focus on enjoying the rest of my life. Even if it meant being a bachelor, I was ready to embrace it. I decided to stay closer to my kids for a while and perhaps even set up a family home where we could all gather peacefully, especially since our children are grown now. In the months that followed, I kept receiving updates and messages about Jennifer's ongoing drama. One day, Brad texted me again, asking if I was really going to divorce her and even offered to take her off my hands. I replied that Jennifer was free to choose for herself, and then I blocked him for good. I wasn't going to let his constant attempts at provocation derail me any further. I still felt the sting of betrayal, and the thought of sharing a bed with her was unbearable. Over the past year, I've been traveling quite a bit, living in different countries, embracing local cultures, and even rekindling an old hobby like painting. I originally started sharing my story online to vent about Jennifer's cheating and the heartbreak that followed. But as time went on, I focused more on my adventures and less on the pain. Still, every now and then, I'd hear from people asking if I'd found closure or if I still felt shattered by her betrayal. The truth is, I'm still trying to figure it out. Last month, I even got a chance to see Jennifer again, after 4 long years, because my son Jake was getting married. He had reached out a couple of months earlier, asking if Jennifer and I could meet the parents of the girl he was about to marry. At first, I hesitated and suggested I could just meet them at the wedding, but then I realized it was my duty as a father. The girl's parents were kind enough to host a dinner for us a week before the wedding. Even though I hadn't confirmed my attendance right away, I decided in the end to join them. It was strange seeing Jennifer in that setting. I would have preferred if only one of us had to show up, but I knew I had to be there for Jake. When I arrived at the dinner, Jennifer looked surprised, as if she hadn't expected to see me there, with eyes that hinted at all the changes time had wrought on her. She greeted me politely, but I could tell she was tense. Although she still had her long, thick hair like she always did, she'd aged far more than I expected in these 4 years. The seating arrangement placed us right next to each other, and I couldn't help but suspect that our son hadn't mentioned that this might be our first real conversation in years. Publicly, neither of us made a fuss, but as soon as we were left alone, Jennifer told me that I seemed healthier and happier. I nodded, attributing it to cutting out all the toxicity from my life. Jennifer then asked, rather quietly, if I was seeing someone. I dodged the question, saying that my relationship status was none of her business. I mostly avoided making eye contact, instead focusing on the other dinner guests. After the dinner ended and it was time to say our goodbyes, I gave warm hugs to everyone but only a curt nod to Jennifer, telling her to take care. Apparently, she hadn't expected that, because when she stood up along with the rest of us, she looked visibly hurt. The whole farewell was over in a flash, quick and understated. I tried not to dwell on it afterward, though I couldn't help but notice that my interaction with Jennifer was markedly different now. Either she felt intimidated by me or was too anxious to say more, and I didn't really push it. Once we left the dinner, Jake offered for me to stay with him for a few days. I politely declined and told him I'd call him soon. I then drove back to my hotel. You see, I don't have a permanent home these days, I'm constantly on the move. After spending 26 years as a family man, adopting this nomadic lifestyle has been challenging, but I've grown to enjoy the freedom. And by the way, in the midst of all this upheaval, I eventually found a new companion. Remember Ashley, the amazing woman I met in Tokyo? Well, 2 years after our first meeting, she's become my travel partner, and maybe something more. We've been together for over 1.5 years now, traveling to more than 8 countries. We took it slow from the start, determined not to rush into a serious relationship. I'm not actively looking for anything new, but I remain open to whatever the future brings. On the day of Jake's wedding, things took another dramatic turn. The moment I arrived, I saw Jennifer staring at me, clearly upset when she noticed me holding Ashley's hand. I had warned Ashley that Jennifer might cause a scene, and sure enough, she did. Jennifer suddenly dashed over, grabbed my wrist, and tried to pull me aside. I told her firmly that I wasn't in the mood for a private chat, not with the guests arriving and all eyes on us. Jennifer then demanded to know whether I was calling Ashley my girlfriend or if I planned to marry her. I replied that it wasn't any of her business and asked her to leave us alone. But she wouldn't back down. Her anger was so overwhelming that my daughter, Amanda, stepped in. In a tone that was both hushed and commanding, a side of her I hadn't seen before, Amanda told Jennifer, "Mom, you were supposed to walk into this wedding with Dad, not create a scene with some random woman. Either accept how things are and move on right now, or I'm going to have you kicked out of this wedding." I almost wanted to step in, but Amanda handled it all on her own. I watched as Jennifer's grip on my wrist finally loosened, and for a few agonizing seconds, I saw her face shift from rage to betrayal to deep sadness. Without uttering another word, she turned and walked away. Needless to say, she didn't introduce herself to Ashley on a good note. Amanda later apologized to Ashley, who only gave us a hug in return. I reassured her that everything was all right. Amanda had grown into a strong young woman, and I was proud of her. After the wedding, as I drove back to my hotel, I couldn't help but reflect on how drastically my life had changed. Jennifer's drama had once again disrupted what should have been a joyful celebration. Despite all the pain, I was determined to embrace the future, a future where I could finally enjoy the rest of my life in peace, exploring the world and maybe even building a new family home for my kids. I'm not planning to share any of that part of my life with Jennifer. That chapter is closed. In the end, I've learned a lot about betrayal, loss, and starting over. I still carry the scars of Jennifer's infidelity, but I'm also learning to appreciate the freedom and experiences that my new life brings. I continue to travel, meet new people, and find joy in unexpected places. I know that life will keep throwing challenges my way, but for now, I'm committed to moving forward, one day at a time. And so, that's my update. I'm still waiting for any major developments with the divorce to fully settle, but for now, I'm focused on my work, my children, and the new adventures that lie ahead. I promise to keep you all posted if anything significant happens. Thank you for your support and for listening to my story. Remember, life is full of ups and downs, and sometimes you have to let go of what once was to embrace what can be. Take care, and I'll update you soon. This is my story, a tale of love, betrayal, and the long, winding road to starting over. I hope that by sharing it, I can help someone out there understand that even when you're knocked down, you can still get back on your feet. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm ready to face it head-on, without bitterness, but with the hard-earned wisdom of someone who's been through it all. Thank you for listening, and I hope you all stay true to those you love, because life is too short not to. I'm off now to take care of some unfinished business, and who knows? Maybe someday I'll find a way to fully heal from this heartbreak. Until then, keep your head high and your heart strong.